Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute. I got to tell you, I love the Iowa caucuses. To see the incredible technological meltdown, I could watch it over and over and over again. Barry Fagin is our scholar, our senior fellow in technological policy. So you saw this.
Yeah.
And I just loved it. But you actually had a concern about it.
Well, sure. Of course, it's no fun when it happens to anybody, even if it happens with people who you disagree with.
No, you're wrong. It is really fun when it happens to people I disagree with.
Well, I just know that sooner or later the worm will turn, and that technology is a two-edged sword. So you just have to be careful about that.
My team is team conservative. We still have 12 blinking on our VCRs. I mean, it's not. Yeah.
You guys, you love technology regardless. Everybody does. It makes your life easier, at least in the long run. And ultimately, I think it's a good, beneficial thing. But you got to be careful with it, particularly when technology and young democratic naivete mix, and then add a couple of dashes of cronyism, and then an ignorance of modern software engineering practice, and you could have some bad stuff.
Yeah, the new millennial worldview is there's nothing technology cannot do, and from millennials on down, people our age, remarkably young, good-looking guys, our age, we've kind of got one foot stuck in the analog world of the past and one in the digital world. After us comes kids who will always be digital.
Sure.
They won't realize how to put your needle on the record album, and they'll have to pull up a YouTube video on that.
Mommy, what's a dial?
What's a dial?
Dial phone.
Dial phone.
Yeah.
My nephew, when he was a kid, went to make a phone call, and there's a dial phone. He picks it up, and he just keeps pressing the numbers there.
Yep.
Grandma!
Yep.
But there really is this faith that technology will save us. I actually agree with that. I am a firm believer that there's very little technology will not be able to do for us. But being a little older, I know it's buggy as hell.
Sure, and software in particular is especially complicated. The seductive thing about computing, and that was part of what attracted me to it, was that it really is limited only by your imagination. If you can imagine something happening, then chances are you can get a computer to do it. And I always tell people, when I'm working with something...
You're talking about sex robots here, or are you...
Well, I wasn't my first thought, John, but...
I'm glad I could bring you there.
Yeah, thanks very much. But I was thinking that if I tell people, if I'm working and I can imagine something happening faster than it's actually happening, then it's too slow. I mean, that's kind of the power where things have now brought us. We have now worldwide connectivity. Human beings can communicate with virtually anyone, and it doesn't matter where they live. So it used to be that location was physically important. I mean, it determined so much of your life and your lifestyle and who you interacted with and how, and now that matters much less. So yeah, technology can do some amazing things, but it's always designed by and used by people, and we frail humans, we fallible humans, continue to have all sorts of problems.
What I loved about Iowa is it was the mixture of politics and technological failure. And it's also one of those great things that it's technology that comes on like a fire hose and then it's supposed to be turned off. It's a problem with voting. Every 2 years, we pull out the machines and all of a sudden we ramp up. Amazon is on every day, so they're constantly getting better.
Yeah.
When it comes to this, and I think about, you mentioned the Obamacare sign-in, I forget what that was called.
Healthcare.gov, yeah.
Healthcare.gov.
Yeah, a real
another great
rope, yeah.
Again, loved it. It was spectacular. But that's when it goes from 0 to 60 in a nanosecond and doesn't have the time to build up. And there's always problems with it.
Of course, but especially the problem with the Iowa caucuses was so directly related to technology, and I see this, computing professionals see this over and over again. It was related to something called security through obscurity. Computer systems are very complicated, and they always have bugs. They always have errors, always. And the more useful they are, the more errors they're likely to have. So one of the ways you solve that is you make what's called the source code, so the part that human beings can read. You make that available to outside experts. And they look at it, they say, oh, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be a problem, you shouldn't do this, how about this, and so on. That's just sort of standard practice. If you don't do that, if you say instead, we're not going to show it to anybody because then hackers will get in.
Right.
Well, you can either have hackers who are the good guys or you can have hackers who are the bad guys. And so we're not going to show, the people who designed the app said, well, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to release it at the last moment so that nobody will be able to look at it, including the hackers, and everything's going to work
Really?
great.
So they didn't put this software out sooner. This app wasn't available until very close to the caucuses?
Right, and they didn't test it. In order to download it and install it, you have to tweak the app, you have to tweak the operating system. All that stuff is just simply rampant ignorance of basic software engineering functions, of software engineering practice. And it was even worse, really, they didn't need an app at all. They sort of fell to, they were seduced by the syndrome, oh, there's an app for that. Oh, I know, let's write an app. But actually, Amazon, Microsoft, Google all have cloud-based solutions for transmitting information securely over the internet. You really didn't need an app for that. But what apparently they wanted to do was send a little scratch to their Democrat buddies and do a little crony capitalism and send the and purchase this from a very well-connected politically.
How do you know that?
Because it's in the news. The leftist news media reported it. So I figured if they reported it, then it's probably and it doesn't look bad. Doesn't reflect poorly on them. It reflects poorly on themselves. It's pretty good.
Tell me why I should care about this, because again, it's happening to them, and I'm enjoying it. Yeah. It was one of the worst weeks that the left has had in a long time. They acquit the president. This goes bad. The president has this great press conference. What do they call it? Oh, the State of the Union address. He's giving out medals, and it just the economy gets better. And it was a terrible week for Democrats.
Well,
but it all started with this technical.
So, John, but sooner or later, the worm is going to turn. Technology knows no political affiliation, and sooner or later, the forces of light will also be impacted, in addition to the forces of darkness.
In what way? Give me the example.
Well, so for example, there are at least some conservatives who are push for a real ID, which is a national ID card, as a way of enforcing immigration laws.
So instead of having state-run ID systems like we have in Colorado and another, we have 50 different ID systems.
Right, and so. What's called Real ID, effectively a national ID card, that has some appeal to people who are worried about immigration. But at the same time, it requires a large database, an enormous database, and if anything is wrong in that database, then you're going to be stuck for life. It will take forever to fix. And there are also very serious privacy concerns that conservatives may legitimately be worried about. And there's also enormous power for political vendettas to be carried out through the use of this information. I'm sure you're shocked to find out that members of one political party might gather information from this and use it against their opponents. I'm sure that would never happen. But also, nonetheless, you might worry about it.
I think a lot about when government's in charge of something. One of the reasons I don't want socialized medicine, I don't want the same guys who misplace my mail to be running the operating room and misplace my liver. Right. So, and the same thing with data. We've had data breaches in government operations quite a bit. I do worry about the privacy. I think about the Social Security Act, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I remember looking at the back of my Social Security card when I was a kid, and it says, U.S. code, whatever, this is not to be used for identification purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a lie, it turns out.
Yeah, that is your identification. When you have a 9-digit number, it is you. You want to know anything about you, that's the number you need to know.
Yeah, it's a good example of unintended consequences. Law and technology are always in a race, and technology always wins. The technology is always ahead, and then the law struggles to catch up, or else the law would be used for, there would be what are called unintended consequences of the policy. Originally, Social Security was just intended, for very simple purposes in terms of seeing if you qualified for benefits and things like that. But it grew, and it's now effectively your national ID. It identifies you.
We do have a national ID. It's your Social Security.
And that was never its intention.
Well, as we wrap this up, give me a sense. Therefore, what do we ought to do here? Technology is coming. We use it more and more. We have tracking devices on our bodies, and we do so freely. That information goes to the government. and they can track our communications, they track our whereabouts, they track our movement, and we do it voluntarily because it improves our lives so much to have your iPhone on you.
Sure, and and let's not forget private companies also track that information. That's also a source of concern, more so from the left than from the right. But what the key thing is the word voluntary. As long as it's voluntary, then chances are overwhelming it's improving people's lives. And we have pretty good ideas for how to work with technology and how to negate some of these bad effects. In particular, we have institutions of property rights. If people have property right in their data, in their DNA, in their personal information, then they can either give it away or companies can buy it for them. But as long as they know that it's their data and under what terms they're parting with it, they'll only do that if it's a mutually beneficial transaction. So that's one thing. We can also focus more on the individuals involved and allow for bottom-up solutions. For problems that arise, if the government doesn't step in first with laws, people have their own voluntary ways of solving these kinds of problems. So it would be good for us to let those emerge first from the bottom up.
Give me an example of that.
Well, there are, for example, if we were so drones are, for example, a good example of that. The FAA has absolutely no idea of how to regulate drones because no one imagined when the FAA was first constructed. But if we think about instead, well, human beings own drones, and if individuals own them, so under what circumstances should they be allowed to use them? It's their property. But on the other hand, individual people have rights to privacy, so we can institute privacy rights. People can own the airspace over their homes, for example, things like that. There's also the common law. We have an awful lot of common law that's available to us for recognizing how to regulate interactions between individuals that are tortious or that aren't. So those kind of things will eventually happen from the bottom up if we allow them to do so. And there's also just simple common courtesy. There's social norms that have simply evolved as people live together and work together and voluntarily try to figure these things out.
Talk about social norms. It's funny to see how that plays out on technology. Mm-hmm. You know, that there's politeness, and I'm not talking about all the trolls. I'm just talking about the way you do this. You're texting somebody. If you're texting them in all caps, you know, why are you yelling at me? Mm-hmm. You know, why? You know, those are the norms that come as all this happens. I do worry about our privacy because you say it's voluntary. I don't know. I need my iPhone. Mm-hmm. I cannot compete in a world with other people, and I can't have that until I say yes to all these things. It's when somebody gives me a paper contract, I can read it and go, don't agree with this. I'm going to negotiate with you on this point. Mm-hmm. On your app, it's I've read and I agree to this, and that's it. It's up or down. Yeah. And so I don't know if you really have those rights.
Well, so that's an interesting question. You're sounding more like maybe a leftist than I might otherwise expect, because many on the left would make that same argument that corporations, have something that you want so badly, or they've become so powerful, they've provided the service that is now essential to modern society, that people shouldn't be regarded as contractually agreeing to that because now it's essential and that's what we need laws for. I'm not so sure that that's true. People can shove off Facebook if they don't want to be there. People can go off the grid and go off the net if they don't want to be there. It's just that you have to accept the consequences. And the other thing is, if you don't like it, then maybe you could start a company or convince others to start a company that doesn't do anything with your data or has a very different contractual arrangement that pays you $1 a month or something like that in order for you to give your data, or else allows you to give certain parts of it but not other parts. Those are the kind of multiple bottom-up solutions, as opposed to one-size-fits-all, that are exactly appropriate, I think, for a free society, provided they're allowed to evolve spontaneously, as they so seldom are.
Well, the other reality is you're not going to catch up with the technology. You mentioned this. You know, when I see, it all started with the antitrust suit against Microsoft.
Yeah, I wrote a paper about that.
Right, you're not going to catch up to the technology. By the time you've figured out how to regulate all the technology, we're going to be on to the next thing.
Sure.
Which is beautiful. People want to learn more about this. Where's a good place for them to go?
So the Competitive Enterprise Institute is a good one. I've written some things for independents. You can go to the Independence Institute's website and Google me. You can Google me in general and find I've opined on all sorts of stuff like that. But those are pretty good resources, or at least pretty good places to start.
All right, I'm still going to enjoy the next big lefty technological failure.
Okay, John. But when the rain comes on the right, I'll be talking. Don't come crying to me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Barry, thank you much.
Thank you, John.